Good evening. My name is Henry John Temple, and I am Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. I'm holding this press conference tonight to address questions regarding the multitude of uprisings that took place on the continent over the past couple of years, beginning in 1848. So I'll take the first question from the audience.
What caused all these uprisings?
Well, there was no single factor that caused all these uprisings. Rather, similar conditions existed in many countries across the continent, such as food shortages and poor harvests had been common since 1846. The worst example of these being the Irish potato famine. And stagnant commercial economies and high unemployment led to general unrest and unhappiness and unsatisfaction with the government. With the exception of France, nationalism was a driving force behind most of these revolts, especially with the Germans, Hungarians, Italians, Czechs, and other ethnic groups. Next question, please.
Can you explain the events that occurred in France?
Sure. Well, to begin, French political liberals were very cranky with the way things were going in the government because they didn't have much political power and much political say, especially under Louis Philippe and Guizot. So they quickly began to cause urban riots and things like that. So in the face of these results, Guizot resigned and Louis Philippe abdicated his throne and fled to England on February 24th, 1848. In the wake of Louis Philippe and his abdication of the throne, Alphonse de Lamartine organized a provisional government based on liberal ideas. And interestingly enough, this liberal government came back to bite them. In April of 1848, a French election based on universal male suffrage elected the new National Assembly, yet conservative influences were stronger than most people expected, and the new assembly was full of moderates and conservatives with hardly any liberals. Throughout May and June of that year, troops and angry French citizens clashed in the streets over the election of the new assembly, leaving over 4,000 people dead, and this basically marked the end of the French liberal social revolution. And in the wake of all this political unrest, France held an election for a president. And Louis Napoleon, the nephew of the great Napoleon Bonaparte, ran for president in France, and he was elected late in 1848. He and the National Assembly hotly debated who has more say in the decision-making. Much like his uncle, Louis Napoleon was very power hungry, and he wanted to make all the decisions, and he didn't want to share that power with an assembly. So on December 2nd of 1851, his troops dispersed the assembly quickly, and he gained complete authority with the overwhelming support of French voters. Keep in mind also, at the time, Napoleon Bonaparte was still beloved by French people, and so the name Napoleon comforted French people and gave them a sense of security and safety. And it's also important to note the role of French women during this 1848 revolution. From 1848 to 1851, there was a lot of feminist activity going on in France. And some feminist groups were more radical than others. But basically, all of them pushed for relatively the same goals. They pushed for better education, equal civil rights, and the right to work and vote. The male support for the movement was a bit stronger at first, but then quickly fizzled out as the years went on. And by the time of Louis Napoleon's coup, the movement had been eradicated. I'll take the next question.
How did the events in France lead to similar uprisings in the Habsburg Empire?
Well, the Habsburg Empire, first of all, is naturally very open to uprisings, especially liberal and nationalistic uprisings, because the Habsburg Empire and the Austrian Empire really violated every single idea of liberalism and nationalism. For example, its borders cut across national lines, and it still practiced serfdom, which had long been kind of done away with in the rest of the continent. So the first notable uprising of the Habsburg Empire was the Vienna Uprising. In March of 1848, the Magyar nationalists, who were a nationalist group really from Hungary, so under the Magyar nationalist Louis Kossuth, he called for an independent Hungary, and inspired by his words, many students in Vienna revolted in the name of an independent Hungary and end to Austrian domination. But the Austrian army was unable to restore order. But the Habsburg Empire really wasn't threatened by these small-scale urban revolts. What really terrified them was the prospect of a complete serf uprising in the countryside. That was what was really going to topple them if it ever happened. So, so to smother any chance of the serfs overthrowing the empire, Austrian and Hungarian diets emancipated most of the serfs in their respective realms. And this basically took away any reason the serfs had to support these revolutionary movements and kind of protected the order of the Habsburg Empire. Another notable Habsburg revolt was the Magyar Revolt, and this was inspired by the Vienna Uprising. And so basically the Magyars hoped to create a semi-independent state, a semi-independent Hungarian state, which would allow Ferdinand to remain its emperor, but the Magyars wanted local autonomy. And as part of this deal, the Magyars had planned to annex other eastern territories of the Austrian Empire, such as the Romanians, the Croatians, and the Serbians. However, these groups resisted the Magyars, and because they were satisfied with living under the Habsburg, and they didn't quite like many Hungarians. And this conflict actually is a prime example of how liberalism and nationalism could clash. Also inspired by the events in Hungary, Czech provinces in Bohemia and Moravia demanded an independent Slavic state. And this immediately caused conflict with German-speaking peoples living in the same territories. And although an independent Slavic state never occurred, the Czechs raised the vision of a vast European empire ranging from Poland to Ukraine to Russia. The Czech insurrection was finally suppressed on June 17, 1848, by the Prague Army. So, while trying to deal with Hungarian and Czech bids for independence, the Habsburgs also had to face a war in northern Italy in the province of Milan. And at this time, northern Italy is a province of the Austrian Empire. But by January of 1849, the Austrian Empire, aided by Russian troops, had survived its greatest internal threat, and the Habsburg remained in control of their territory. Next question, please.
How did the outcome of the Austrian campaign in northern Italy affect the Italian provinces?
Okay, well, the defeat of Piedmont at the hands of Austrian General Count Radziski came as a bitter disappointment for many Italian liberals who had hoped that the North Italian uprising would liberate North Italy from Austrian control, and it would allow for a unified Italian state. So this news came as a bitter disappointment to these liberal Italians. Italian people then shifted their support to Pope Pius IX, who they hoped could unite Italy under a liberal state. During this time, though, political radicals were on the rise in Italy, and they forced Pope Pius to flee his realm, and he fled to Naples. And these radicals proclaimed a new Roman Republic and hoped to unite Italy under a republican government. Next question, please.
Describe the events that took place in Germany and Prussia.
Well, both in Germany and Prussia, there were large popular disturbances, especially in Berlin. And during the uprising in Berlin, several Berlin citizens were shot and killed by royal troops. And so the next day, Frederick William IV appeared on his balcony to salute the corpses of his killed subjects and promised that Prussia would help unify Germany. Frederick William then appointed a cabinet headed by moderate liberal David Hansemann. He proclaimed a new constitution, and one of its key features was a system of three-class voting. And basically what this voting system is it allowed universal male suffrage along tax bracket lines. So basically, the highest paying tax bracket, the top 5%, They elected 1/3 of the Prussian parliament, and so on. This led to the gathering of the Frankfurt Parliament. On May 18th, 1848, representatives from all the German states gathered in St. Paul's Church in Frankfurt to revise the organization of the German Confederation. And this parliament was very liberal in nature. So the liberal character of the Frankfurt Parliament alienated both German conservatives and the German working class, who wanted to restore the trade guilds that the liberals had abolished. The parliament further demonstrated its dislike of urban workers when it called on troops to suppress a workers' insurrection in Frankfurt. Obviously a big topic of discussion for this parliament was German unification. And there were two main options. The first option was called a large German solution, and this favored Austria's inclusion in Germany. Option number 2 was called the small German solution, which favored Austria's exclusion from a united Germany. And eventually, after much debate, option 2 prevailed, mainly because too many Austrians rejected the whole notion of German unification. The parliament then drafted a constitution for a united German state and offered its crown to Frederick William IV of Prussia. However, Frederick declined the offer, and soon after, Parliament dissolved, practically ending German liberalism. In conclusion, all of these continental uprisings proved to be a false hope for progressive Europeans. Not one revolution was able to establish a liberal or national state. The conservative order was more resilient than anyone had expected, and the liberal political activists didn't do enough to gain the support of the masses. Thank you very much.